Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the club member tasting for our 30th club, Ancient Roots of Rome, Wines of the Etruscans. Really excited. Unfortunately, Dana wasn't able to join us tonight, so it's just going to be the three of us. T is actually over in Hawaii with me today. We're house sitting up in.
You thought they were going to move, but
If
then
everyone wouldn't mind muting yourselves
or
just
that
before we get started here.
bunch of grandkids, and it was harder.
Um,
There you go. Perfect.
Thanks. So yeah, as we were saying, we're just there's two of us here in Hawaii today and one of us in where Ryan, where are you at tonight?
I'm in the Bay Area at home
In the
here.
Bay Area.
And
Okay, so
yeah.
we got Ryan outnumbered tonight. Dana unfortunately wasn't able to join us tonight, but we're really excited about this club. Again, we say this a lot, but this is one of those ones we've been tossing around for quite a long time and finally had an opportunity to do. We actually haven't, believe it or not, we haven't had a club from featuring wines from Tuscany before, which is just one of those iconic regions in the wine world. So this was a perfect opportunity to marry some really amazing wines with some really amazing and interesting history. So usual protocol, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Ryan's going to sort of monitor that, and then we'll take questions at the end as well, as always. If something's really burning you and you want to jump in, feel free to do that during the chat as well. So without further ado, I think we'll toss it over to, I believe Ryan's going to take the first wine here, which is the white from the club. Here's a little map just to orient you. We can come back to this if you want to at any point. You can kind of see the overlap. This was in the club write-up as well, but you can see the overlap between modern Tuscany, just here, and Umbria, and the sort of heartland of Etruria, the Etruscans. And then they did at certain points expand outside of this heartland into Corsica, which we talked about a couple of clubs ago, and up here into the northern part of Italy, and then even down into Campania, and they were in the Bay of Naples and in southern Italy as well. So, all right, Ryan, take
Perfect.
it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so this first wine that we're gonna be talking about today that I have here in my glass is the 2021 Tenuta Belafonte Sparella, which is from Umbria. The appellation is Montefalco Bianco. And as I said, this is from Umbria, so kind of from central Italy, so more rolling hills, more highlands, a little bit more known for more mountainous region there. This grape is made from 100% Trebbiano Spoletino, which is it's a really interesting grape that is actually one of those grapes that was sort of maybe a little bit lost, if you will, to time. Only it was almost kind of extinct up until recent decades when it's been sort of rediscovered. Now, Trebbiano as a grape, this is one of those always confusing. It's Italian wine varieties are always a source of confusion because there's lots of overlaps in names, but they may not actually be related. Trebbiano is actually a very common grape that is found all throughout Italy and also all throughout France, where it's known as Ugni Blanc. In Italy, there's a variety called Trebbiano Toscana that is pretty much ubiquitous all throughout Tuscany and all throughout actually a lot of parts of Italy in general. It's unfortunately a wine that is used a lot for distilling actually in France. It's used partly in cognac, but it's also used to just make a lot of kind of like cheap table whites. It can make some pretty horrendously boring wines, unfortunately. And so Trebbiano Spoletino is actually not genetically similar or related, I should say, to Trebbiano itself. It just carries that moniker. So there's actually some talk about changing the name of the grape to just Spoletino. The name Spoletino comes from the town of Spoleto, which is near where this winery is located. So Tenuta Belafonte, small winery, just about 11 hectares, started by a former food and beverage executive who basically left Milan and decided to go open kind of like an agroturismo sort of a farm, all sustainably farmed, all organically farmed, not certified. He's basically, really trying to create a sustainable winery, solar power. He uses like a bioreactor to power some of the winery machinery, things like that. But again, the wine here is really aiming to express this unique variety that just really comes from around the village. Only 5 producers were growing this grape about 10 years ago, and now there's about 20 producers growing this grape. Still only about 100, maybe 150 acres in total production. So 5,000 bottles produced of this very unique wine. And let's just dive right in. So one of the first things I noticed is the color, deep kind of golden yellow there, really beautiful, just in the glass. But the nose for me brings out a lot of that kind of like, golden fruits, golden apple. I get these like bright kind of pineapple tones, actually some more tropical tones today. I was just discussing with Jeff and T that this is a perfect wine actually for Hawaiian food. I was maybe a little bit inspired, maybe a little bit jealous of the guys, I should say that the lion's share of the guys on the call tonight being in Hawaii. So I don't know if my mind just went there because of that, but yeah, definitely a lot of that kind of like juicy, almost kind of like bruised yellow fruit, and a lot of just really nice texture to it as well. What are you guys getting over there?
I get a lot of pineapple, and then I also get on the nose honeysuckle as well. It's a little bit floral, but it's like a subtle way, not
yeah, it's one of those wines that can have like a little bit of like a sweetness on the nose, where you smell that ripe fruit, you smell, like you said, the honeysuckle, kind of like sort of like juicy, sweeter fruits to it, but then on the palate, it's bright, it's zippy, it's almost like there's like almost like saline minerality to it.
There's a good salinity to it, and I get like kind of like green pineapple, just like underripe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a little passion fruit too. We were talking about it too. To me, I don't know that many wines that like white wines or get a white pepper, like obviously Gruner Veltliner, but it has a little bit of that kind of white peppery, just kind of lifts it up a little bit too. It's super delicious.
Yeah, definitely versatile. I mean, for again, food pairings, obviously all the kind of white meats. I think mushrooms would do really well with this because it has a little bit of that kind of like earthy, savory quality to it. But yeah, just in general, I think it's a really, really fun wine. This one came a little bit as a surprise to us. I think Umbria is definitely better known for its reds. There is the most, let's say, famous red variety from there is Sagrantino, which also kind of had a similar trajectory to what Spoletino is going through, in that it was essentially kind of a little bit pushed to the wayside in favor of Sangiovese, especially in the early and mid 20th century, and only until the last maybe 40-50 years did Sagrantino really kind of have this resurgence, this renaissance in Umbria, and kind of this rediscovery and reappreciation, I should say, by international markets as well. So you have producers who are now making a distinctly Umbrian red, and here you're having a distinctly Umbrian white. There's a lot of other varieties that can go into sometimes these blends, like again, like a Montefalco Rosso can be largely Sangiovese still, even though Sangiovese is found obviously throughout Tuscany and throughout other parts of Italy. So again, kind of like developing a regional identity is something that I think I'm kind of seeing more and more in Italy, and actually across Europe as well. Is these regions that are kind of trying to have a stake their flag, if you will, in a variety and say, hey, this is what we do. This is what we do very well, and here's why. So I think it's cool that they have this, this unique wine. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually change the name to just Spoletino, if you start seeing that in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either, just because Trebbiano kind of is grown elsewhere in Italy, and it kind of has like a mixed reputation. Yeah. I mean, and as Ryan mentioned, Umbria and Tuscany, I think because of how famous Tuscany, has been and is, I think the whole region itself has pretty much been dominated by reds. And actually the food there is more meat heavy as well. So kind of makes sense why they drink more reds there than whites. But I think this is a great seafood wine. I think like anything like shrimp scampi with this would be fantastic. Like,
yeah, maybe it's just because I watched the Stanley Tucci episode on Umbria the other day on the airplane. Was it Discovering Italy?
Yeah.
But he was really just hyping up the pork there. But I think maybe that's the Hawaiian connection as well, with like a kulua pork here with some barbecue sauce could be the winner pairing, I think. For this,
you guys have to report back for me.
Yeah,
I'll just sit here and listen.
We'll try it. Definitely try it out tonight. We'll let you know. So
Yeah. Well, this is like I said, this is a wine that I think is something that you could lay it down for a year or two if you end up forgetting about it and not drinking it immediately. But personally, I think it's drinking really nicely right now. There is a little bit of that like oxidative characteristic in the winemaking there, where you get a little bit of, again, that kind of bruised apple sort of note to it. And for me, I think there's a really nice amount of energy in this wine. It's drinking really nicely, but probably something, again, if it's going to end up in my cellar, it's not going to last through the end of the year because I'm going to drink it. Especially if I want to go back for more. Would be also a really good wine at the Thanksgiving table. Just thinking ahead, 4 months. That kind of fall flavor can kind of come out there for me too. So very fun wine.
yeah, great discovery.
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to move
jump to the
on to
next
the
one?
next wine there?
I just wanted to ask you to
Yeah.
elaborate on that point you made about the oxidative characteristics
Mhm.
In Italy, because there are a lot of Italian whites that are darker, more golden in color than certain whites from other regions like France or California or whatever. Is that like a tradition thing, or is it a terroir thing? Why does that happen?
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of factors. One, yes, part of it is just winemaking style. It's just like, okay, you have a little bit more skin contact, you have a little bit more, a little bit more phenolic content and ripeness that you're pulling out with the with the particular decisions at winemaking time. Also, yeah, variety. Some white varieties just kind of give a deeper color, depending on what amount of maceration that you do for it. So another one that I see oftentimes is having this kind of deeper color. You'll see like Falanghina down in Campania. You'll see it sometimes from Fiano, Fiano Diavolino. There's a lot of different varieties that tend to get made this way. Garganega up in the Suave region. Also, you'll see this kind of more golden color versus like some of the more pale kind of straw colors. I mean, you definitely see those wine, that a full spectrum of colors and in Italian white wines. I would say the oxidative tone, that's also something that's a little bit, I would say, dependent on the region, dependent on the winemaking. It's probably regarded as a little bit more old school, if you will, where if you're not using highly controlled like pumping systems where you let no oxygen come in. If you're doing only stainless steel and you're making sure that the wine is always topped up and never has any exposure to air, then you're not going to get that kind of more like nutty oxidative character that you can get. You're going to get a much more kind of like brisk, fresh character that can actually have a little bit of reduction, which is the opposite kind of oxidative winemaking, where where that doesn't come out. But unfortunately, it's kind of one of those like it depends answers, but it really is a combination. And it also has to do with the varieties. So like in France, like Chardonnays and Viogniers and Sauvignon Blancs, that wasn't the preference also to do with those. But now you see people making wines in oxidative styles with those varieties as well. So yeah, it really just depends on the winemaking decisions.
And I think in Italy as well, they're not afraid of a little bit more like, say, darker color rosés, like Galliopo. I've seen some darker rosés made from them, and
like
then
Chiro,
yep. And then also, if you're on the Slovenian border, you have people like the influence of Slovenian wines, and so you have like Damajan, who makes a really great.
Well, like orange skin contact whites. Yeah, that's a good point there too, because I think you have more influence from places that from farther afield that had more skin contact in the white wine making, especially I would say from Central Europe, Eastern Europe. Like you see a lot of it in Hungary, Serbia, Bosnia, Slovenia, Croatia. Lots more skin contact in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is some of that kind of heritage, if you will, for appreciation for a little bit darker colored whites. Yeah, I mean in France you mentioned rosé, like it basically there's like one dark style rosé in France, and they basically have it sequestered to one village called Tavel in southern France. You know, and it's great. The wines are great. You know, but they're it's one of those things where, you know, aside from there's rosé and then there's Tavel. It's kind of how the French usually see it, where it's like they're like, yeah, you can make a dark rosé, but you shouldn't. And if you do, you should call it Tavel, and you should make it in Tavel. I mean, that's kind of the more conservative sort of take on it. But I'm joking. But there's yeah, a little bit more conservative there when it comes to color. Cool.
Cool,
Speaking of
great questions. Yeah.
moving on there, yeah, it's a great question.
Here
Oh,
you
yeah.
go. Here you go, Jeff.
Thanks, too.
All right, so the next one we have is the 2019 Torre Arcone Chianti Colli Fiorentini from Tuscany, Italy. It's grown. This is, to me, a classic, well-made Chianti. It's grown on the hills surrounding Florence. Torre Arcona actually means tower on a hill, and I'm sure there were towers around in these hills during the wars between Siena and Florence during the Middle Ages. And so this is 100% Sangiovese, grown sustainably. And what's unique about this wine is it is actually a blend of Sangiovese that is aged, fermented in stainless steel, and Sangiovese that is fermented and aged in neutral Slovenia oak barrels. And so the reason behind this is the winemaker wants to capture the freshness of Sangiovese, which by having it in stainless steel, but while blending it with like the complexity and the nuance that oak aging gives, but and the air exchange that one has when one ages wine in an oak barrel. So the result, I think, is a really nice balance between freshness and just more, and while imparting some tannins and some earthiness to the wine. I think the color, it's really pretty garnet. There's a little bit of starting to brick a little bit on the edge for your wine. On the nose, I get this like almost really sweet cherry, like kind of like Moreno cherries. And the palate, I get, it has this like nice plum, cassis, but it's not, you don't taste the oak. There's still a little bit of a good acidity, freshness to it, hint of raspberry, cherry. I think this is incredibly versatile wine. I mean, this is like, and I know it's classic like meat sauce, like ragu kind of wine. Boar, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I really like it definitely to me kind of leans toward the stainless. You know what I mean? You don't really get that kind of oak, for me at least, the oak imprint. It's more kind of fresh and vibrant. Kind of, yeah, has a not quite racy, but it definitely is like it's got some sharpness to it.
And then there's a little bit of earth to it.
Yeah.
And honestly, when Ryan and I tasted this, we were pretty stoked because you don't find, I know it's not, you don't find Chiantis at this price, or if you do, it's the kind that's in a, straw basket. That's
The
not
wicker fiasco,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the name of that type of bottle. I mean, there are some good wines that are made in the fiasco bottle type now, as kind of this, taking back, if you will, of the iconic vessel there, which was used to make really, really terrible wines for a long time. But now there's definitely good wines that come in fiascos. But yeah, I mean, I think, when we tasted this wine, I do remember kind of having that, we looked at each other and was like, all right, this is some serious wine for the price. And it was definitely kind of felt like a steal there. And I think like you're saying, Jeff, like that kind of like, there's that brightness to it. This is obviously all very like textbook Chianti, that kind of those bright red fruits. I really love the kind of like black tea sort of tannin to it. That has this nice kind of, like a little bit savory spice around the edges too. Just a really like humble and delicious wine from a very old school estate. I believe the the actual winery's been around since 1066 was the date that I saw. So Battle of Hastings, right? That's the for the history lovers there, or sorry, I should say English history lovers. We're all history lovers here if you're on this call, but yeah. So the style there, I would say, is classic, but very well executed. You know, this is like you said, there's some oak, but it's not overbearing. It's not super sharp and thin. Yeah, just a really nice wine from just outside of Florence there.
Yeah, it helps, I think, having it in the glass for a few minutes too. I think when we poured it, it's a little bit, definitely had a little, took a minute to loosen it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical. I think honestly, I think Sangiovese is a grape that it wants almost always like at least half an hour open before it's really going to kind of relax and not be angry at you for pouring out of the bottle. And I love how especially in these types of wine, like it'll kind of pick up a little bit more flesh and sweetness as it takes on air. It will have this, you know, roundness that comes on the palate, and you'll stick your nose in the glass and you'll get things that you didn't get 10-15 minutes before. You're like, wow, it's like you said, it smells like, you know, ripe fruits, ripe cherries. Whereas if you first taste it right out of the glass, sometimes you might go, oh wow, that's like really intense. It's very, you know, it's bright, shows all the kind of like the puckery sort of notes, but it'll relax and give up more aromatics as it opens up for sure.
I really like the smooth, silky texture in the entry, which is unusual for a lot of grapes from this area. They tend to be a little more tannic, a little bit more rough, and maybe it has to do with the simplicity of the wine. But that kind of texture is pretty pleasing, until you know, and you don't really have a lot of tannins. It's probably simple wine. There is a little bit of sweetness before the acid kicks in. And I think that has to do with the ripeness of the grapes. But for the price, it's a really good wine.
Yeah. So that what you're picking up on there, I think partly is the winemaking. Yeah, like yes, like I think they did a really nice job of not extracting any of the kind of, you know, more bitter elements there. But they also you know, this is a vintage 2019 that had a good amount of ripeness to it. It was not a cool vintage. This was a vintage that had it definitely had you know, a hot summer, long growing season. And so when you get that you know, when you get that warmth in the vintage, obviously your sugar levels rise, you get more there's more glycerol content, you have more texture, more dry extract is the term that they use, that winemakers will use for basically you know, the amount of material that's not the water alcohol content in the grapes. So that's what kind of can give a little bit of that smoothness, that you know, that nice kind of like sort of sweet softness that you can pick up on there. Again, even from a grape or from a wine that typically isn't always showing that right off the bat. Yeah.
Well, speaking of ripeness, let's see how the 2023 vintage turns out in Europe.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not growing any grapes in Phoenix, Arizona. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just got back from there, and it was 108 degrees in Rome 2 days ago. So
oh boy,
stay tuned. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm glad we weren't in Greece. You know, we were in Greece in March, as many of you know, but apparently the lines for the Acropolis, they have no shade, and they're basically people are dropping like flies out there, you know, waiting in line to get their tickets for the Acropolis. So
yeah,
you know,
Wine Guys tours are going to be in the spring.
Yeah.
Spring, I think spring and fall exclusively, because boy, it looks pretty tough out there to be.
I mean, and it also, like, you know, the white marble, like you're getting heat from the sun, and then that's reflected off.
Well, and a lot of basalt too.
Basalt, yeah.
Yeah, in Italy it's basalt. Right?
I was at the Acropolis in mid-June, and all I can tell you is go up there early.
Yeah.
By about 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 in the morning, massive crowds, busloads and busloads, and it gets really hot.
And by the time
Go there
you're coming
first thing
down
in the morning.
Yeah, you're pretty much a medium rare by the time you come off the hill, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So should we kick it over to the next one? We can come back to this at the end too. But...
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's why don't we mosey on to wine number 3 there.
Okay, so this one is the 2020 Salustri Marleo Montecucco Rosso. So Montecucco it's a smaller appellation in Tuscany. It's near Maremma and kind of in the heart of it. 400 meters above sea level. The winemaker here, Leonardo Salustri, he's the one who actually helped establish the Montecucco Rosso DOC. And so this wine is made from a combination of 90% Sangiovese and 10% Chilegiolo. And Giolo, there was a 2007 paper of a published paper that did some DNA testing, and they claim that it's actually a parent grape of Sangiovese, but other people have challenged it. So it's a matter of debate. But Chilegiolo, it's always a blending grape. You never see it on its own. And it's not grown that widely, actually. And usually it's blended, especially in this region, with Sangiovese. And this is organically farmed, done in neutral oak barrels. And yeah, let's try it out.
One of the things just about the Montecucco appellation that I think is kind of worth knowing is it's really an appellation that, like as T mentioned, that they had to kind of fight to get established, because it's really kind of in the shadow of Maremma and then also Montalcino. So like Montalcino is right there. This is just near Siena. It's an appellation that is definitely overshadowed by, shall we say, like more prestigious zip codes very close by. So I mean, for us, it's a wine that I think punches above its weight class for sure. When you start considering some of the fancy pants vineyards that are only a few dozen kilometers away, you're in very similar soils, and very similar climate, and exposures as well as some of those really kind of high end Brunello de Montalcinos.
Yeah.
And Ryan, can you talk a little bit about? A question I was going to ask on the last one actually, but was going to save to the end. But just talk a little bit about the creation of new appellations in Italy. I mean, it's a pretty
it's ongoing. I mean, it's something,
a lot of it happening, right?
There's a lot of it happening. I'm not up on all of the newest ones, but it's definitely something that's happening. It's something that I think definitely more so than I would say France. Just to my knowledge, there, like the DOCs and DOCGs in Italy are kind of, there's a lot more kind of constant, at least like review and revision. Not to say that they're making those changes, but there's a lot of challenges to the changes. There's a lot of like, hey, should we add this? Should we change this? And there's a lot of politicking about it, about the appellations there, because the DOC and DOCGs are very well regarded in Italy. They're very highly prized. Whereas I think, like, again, for example, like in France and in other countries in Europe, the appellations, maybe people can make like a Vin de France now, and you can charge a lot of money for it if you have a good wine or good reputation. In Italy, it's not quite the same. The DOC and DOCG still reigns supreme, I would say. And so all that said is that establishing one is big money. If you were previously like a regional designation wine, and now you're able to put that DOC label or DOC, or most likely DOC, they're probably not going to be adding new DOCGs, like just willy-nilly. But the process there is ongoing. So you see I feel like every year I see like a new region that I've never heard of, doing something that's maybe similar to some of its neighbors, but they're just like, no, we're different because this. So it's a very active process. I would say, I feel like here in the United States, or I should say at least here in California, we get new AVAs pretty frequently. I think we just got one that's going to go into effect in early August here just up in Lake County. But all that said is that the appellation system is something that is tied to to progress in new generations. So I think it's a great thing. I personally am a big fan of Italy kind of having that willingness to explore and to say, hey, no, all of our terroirs have potential, and so to really kind of delineate that.
Yeah, and it has the most wine grapes in the world, right? Different varieties. So it's like makes sense to kind of have the identity of the different grapes go with the different regions, right? So
Yeah, and by contrast to you know, like as far as like number of appellations and number of grapes and like how, you know, the patchwork or, you know, jigsaw puzzle, if you will, of appellations, like good luck memorizing all of them. You know, that's what I always say. Like people who are like true Italian wine masters and who like have it all memorized, I have so much respect for, and it's so difficult. You know, versus again, like I was always more focused in France, as you might know, and it's France is pretty easy. You know, I gotta say, like compared to Italy, and so like Italy was always the intimidating final boss, if you will, of the whole thing, where you're like, boy, there's 85 appellations and, you know, between one and a half regions. So
I remember when Ryan and I were working at the wine shop, and we're like, I understand France pretty well. Like, you know, I got pretty good grasp on France. Spain is not too bad. And then you're like Italy, and you're like, oh my God, what region, what grape? Like, you know, different names for the same grape, you know.
I think that's why it catches people in ways that other parts of the world don't. Is because there is always that newness. There's that you feel like there's always a stone kind of left, you know, that's unturned, and so it provides kind of endless excitement for you know, wine lovers and wine explorers. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's that always that question we get into quite a lot with the just the importation of or whether there was importation or not of Greek varieties and different varieties from other places in those kind of early days of,
Yeah.
you know, the Greek settlement
Yeah.
in southern Italy, and that's what in Magna Graeca, which we talked about that
Yeah.
at some length. That's interesting too, is kind of what's the origin of you know, some of these grapes too.
Did you have a question there, Jim?
Yeah, could I ask you a question?
Yeah,
So, Montecuccio DOC, because this wine is named Rosso, like everybody knows Sangiovese is a red wine, right? Like, does this if they're calling it Rosso, that means it implies there might be a Blanco, right? Is there a white wine from this DOC region that you guys do you know?
you know, it's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think there's a Montecucco Bianco. There
I
is.
I never
haven't
had
seen it.
one.
It's a good question.
Good question. I don't know. I don't think I've.
Oh yes. So
I mean,
no, there
maybe they
is.
say that just
It's
because
Trebbiano. So
sure, right?
it is an appellation. It's a DOC, and so it is the Trebbiano Toscana that I was maligning earlier in my discussion about Trebbiano Spoletino. So yeah, there's probably a reason we haven't had a Montecucco Bianco quite as frequently as the Rossos, and I'm being playful here. I'm sure there's very delicious Trebbiano Toscanas, and, you know, made from the appellation, but yeah, so there is.
You
Do
want
you guys want to dive into the glass
Yeah.
there? Tell me what you're getting.
tell us what you got
Yeah.
here.
It's really interesting to compare this with
Yeah.
the previous one.
Mhm.
I get the sense that this one there's a little bit more intensity to it, but there's a little bit more blue fruit. Like I get more of like a kind of blueberry boysenberry fruit to it. The nose is a little bit similar. I feel like the other one, the Terra Alcone, has a little bit more earth to it than this one.
This one definitely has to me again. I think this has a lot more kind of oak imprint, and
Yeah.
the tannin is there. Like
Yeah.
maybe that's just from it's 1 year newer, but I feel
Yeah.
like this wine has a little bit more of that kind of tannic structure. It definitely.
I think this one can age.
Yeah, that's
more
kind of what
a
I
little
was
bit
thinking
too.
too.
Yeah.
Might actually be beneficial to sit on this for a year or two before it's kind of in the prime. But I mean, it's delicious. But
Yeah. I think this requires something like a little bit richer, like kind of more a stew, like a braise.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
Yeah, I think the this, like you said, the structure is definitely a bit different from like the Torre Icona, even though primarily Sangiovese here as well. The Ciliegiolo, I think, is also, you know, there's going to be some effect from that. That's not there for nothing. I think that gives a little bit of that blue fruit, a little bit of that kind of like punchy sort of floral tone there. That's one of the varieties that you see, you know, in Tuscany as a blending grape. Like T was saying, that you know, I would say maybe akin to, I mean, not not the same structure or whatever, but kind of like Petit Verdot in Bordeaux. You'll see like
Definitely,
you never see a Petit Verdot from Bordeaux. I mean, I think there are some people who are making 100% Ciliegiolos now, if I remember correctly, and Canaiolos, some of these kind of like, you know, like blending grapes, Tuscan blending grapes that they're now just turning into single varieties, but it's not common. It's like it's quite rare. And I think in the case of, for example, Ciliegio here, this is, you know, it serves a purpose for this wine. You know, it's gonna give a character to it that I think one is going to help distinguish what the Montecucco appellation actually is going for in their style. So I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, this is a decision made by, again, you said the winemaker, he's establishing the DOC here. So knowing that they are competing with all of their local Tuscan counterparts in Brunello, et cetera, Maremma, I'm definitely not surprised to see decisions like, using these blending grapes, which are maybe eschewed a bit in the more famous parts of Tuscany for just pure Sangiovese. Mm-hmm. And again, side note on when I just said pure Sangiovese, there are many clones of Sangiovese that we'll get into that a little bit in the next wine. But so purity in Sangiovese is one of those things that you can make a lot of enemies in this area by saying Sangiovese is Sangiovese, because those in Montalcino will say no, this is not Sangiovese. This is a different clones, the different variety that we have here. Whereas when you start matching up, I guess some of the genetics of it, it's similar, but and you get into the kind of clonal parentage and all that kind of stuff discussions again. But yes, so when I say pure Sangiovese, it is just Sangiovese. It's what they're calling Sangiovese.
Yeah, and I think what Ryan was saying with Leonardo Salucci trying to establish the Montecucco DOC, it's kind of like what Francois Chedin did with Mont-Louis sur Loire. I mean, he basically established that appellation. His Chenin Blanc are completely unique, right? He's making a lot, Chenin Blanc in a demi-sec, style, or like super dry, but still with like more like skin contact and intensity than say Summer. Yeah.
And he's a great example of somebody who ran afoul of the politicking of the local appellation, where he was making his winery is in Mont-Louis-sur-Loire. We're in France now, for those who are in the Loire Valley, for those who are not is up on their Loire Valley appellations as P and I are. So we're discussing in the Loire Valley here. But so Francois was making wines at his winery in Mont-Louis-sur-Loire, but from the appellation of Vouvray across the river. And the Vouvray appellation got very upset at that, and they said, you can't call your wines Vouvray. They're not made in Vouvray. And, they're made in your winery across the river in a different appellation. So they sued him, and they made him lose his appellation for many of his wines. And he said, well, I don't need your stupid appellation anymore. I can make these wines and just call them, my name and the Vin de France, and that's fine. So I think there's some very kind of comical examples of him and his friend Olivier Cousin giving it back to the Vouvray appellation, which is notoriously maybe conservative and a bit stingy and a bit reluctant to accept change in that area there. So again, this is something that's probably very, very common in Italy as well, where someone is trying to, hey, I'm trying to make this wine a little bit different. This is what my customers want. This is bringing more money to the appellation. And the appellation says, no, you have to make it this way or the highway, or you're not going to be, you're not going to be part of us. So I think there's some benefit to that rigidity of, style, and of, these exist for a reason to, guarantee a sense of place. But also I think there's times when it really holds back innovation.
So I tend to think of appellations as trademarks. Really, and especially in the United States, somebody gets successful in some sub-region of an appellation. Now they want their appellation, so that they get their own trademarks. In Europe, the trademarks are a little bit more regimented by history and tradition and so forth, but they're still trademarks. That's why you get all these fights.
Yep. Yeah. So I think especially here in California, you see AVAs that kind of get made pretty freely. if you start poking around on some of the maps and you start looking into like, how many wineries actually exist in this, I don't know, 50 square mile AVA, and you go, oh, there's two, and it was just like, two guys who just lobbied for it and they got it, and now they can put this whole AVA on their label. I'm like, okay, I guess if you make a good enough argument, that works, and that's a way to start, and hopefully other people can take advantage of that in the future. But I think there is also some, like you said, it's kind of this trademarking of a geography that is more of a marketing thing than really a wine quality and a terroir and a distinction of geographical and kind of enological uniqueness. Whereas, so I think in Europe, it's definitely more rigorous for sure. And part of that is, like you said, is there's historical capital involved there. There's a lot more heritage, if you will, from their perspective to consider. Whereas here we're a relatively young wine region, in the United States, obviously. So it's still developing, and I think there's maybe a little bit more. It's a little bit more okay in my eyes to kind of just try it out, and then I think over time things will be things will be understood better as far as like what's fair, what makes sense. But yeah, especially for things again like Napa, parts of Napa right now, I'm like, oh boy, that's just big money. That's just, if you're on this side of one road, you get one appellation, you get the other. And I think it's less described by maybe huge amounts of understanding of terroir in certain cases, but I won't get too into the politics there, but I have my beliefs about certain parts of Napa. So, but yeah, it's a good point.
So going back to this wine, it's coming straight off the bottle. It had very strong, earthy, spicy kind of characteristics in the entry. Big tannins, long finish. It was definitely a much more complex and bigger wine than the previous. But then, we aerated it, and we also let it we did it by aeration also. We just let it sit in the bottle, and it softened up quite a bit and became more fruity and less spicy. So depending on what style you like, for those who like the more fruity, lighter style, they may want to decant this for a little while.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great point about how the wines kind of evolve and change over time. Some people assume that it's just going to get better as it opens up. Same thing goes for aging. Some people think, oh, older is better. Not always the case. It depends what you like. I personally, I love seeing wines when they're closed and like tight and really kind of, I don't know, I use the term angry because I always think of them like, they're like kids you're trying to get out of bed and they're just like, no, I don't want to get up. And, I don't want to wake up and go do stuff that they're kind of fighting back at you a little bit. That's kind of always my sort of my thought about it. I like to see that, that the wine has that, that trajectory as it opens up in the glass. I think that's more of a journey for me. That's more stimulating for me, I think, intellectually when I'm drinking a wine. And so all that is to say is like, there's kind of no wrong way to do it if you're enjoying it. And so that's, but I think, coming at it from that, like, okay, if you really like it on the sort of like fruitier, sweeter side, do this, or if you want to experience more of that, do that. That's just kind of getting to know, one, your own palate, and two, how to handle wines, how to serve them kind of to your own liking. So yeah, great point. Well, guys, what do you think? Should we move on to the next
Yeah,
wine?
so many of
Or did
you,
guys get yeah, go ahead.
this was one of our most popular special offer wines. So we love this opportunity to pick out wines that are just not quite either from a price point perspective or just we have so many amazing wines that we work with every single club that didn't quite fit in the lineup, and this is one of the more exciting special offers that we've actually had. T and Ryan tracked this down. A wine actually that's aged in an Etruscan tomb, which is kind of amazing. So this is from the 2013. The date probably jumps out right away at you. Colle Santa Mustiola, Vigna Flavia. From actually it's from Chiusa, which is one of the Etruscan centers. It's an interesting place actually because it was if you read the write-up, Etruria was it was gradually subsumed into the Roman Empire. At that point we call it more the Roman Republic, but disappeared in terms of kind of its hegemony over a lot of the territories it controlled earlier on. But Cusa actually held on for a variety of reasons. It wasn't on the coast, and it flourished until really the 2nd century BCE, and wasn't fully absorbed into the Roman Empire until 80 BCE. So it was an area that did really well. A lot of the tombs from this area are very, very famous. Something called the Francois vase in Florence is probably, many people consider it the greatest example of Black figure Greek pottery was found in a Greek tomb there. So it's an area that was really rich in archaeological finds. So it's kind of a cool connection to make as you're sipping on this wine. So this is the guys were alluding to the idea of different clones of Sangiovese. So the winemaker here, Fabio Ceni, he makes, I think it's 28 different clones of Sangiovese he's working with in 12 acres. These are all Massal selection wines, which are, made just from the territory he has across, cross-pollinating the wines from there. And 2013, T was telling me, I think is the latest vintage you can get. So you can't even get a 2014 at the moment. So he's holding on to these wines, ages them for 54 months in large Slavonian oak barrels. I think they're like 2,000 to 3,000 liter barrels. So it's a wine that spends a lot of time in barrel, 4+ years, and then they're holding on to it in the cellar before you can even get it, basically 10 years. So it's just the sort of a history of the wine that precedes us even drinking it is kind of cool to think about. Really interesting wine. So
I have a funny story about Ryan and I actually kind of lucked in on this wine because we were tasting Tuscan wines, and we tell the importer what our price point is for what we're looking for the club, and the sales rep said she happened to have this other Sangiovese. She's like, it's kind of expensive, but I'm showing it to another account. Do you want to try it? And we're like, sure. And she brought this.
We totally got suckered into this. It was like, oh, I just happened to have this open. Yeah, it was perfect.
It was perfect. And then, at first when Ryan and I saw this, we're like, is this just like leftover inventory you can't sell? Like, what is this?
Yeah, the 2013 date, like when you see a date like that, it should make you a little bit suspicious, right? Because you're like, well, why? Did you just find this in your basement or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then I mean to finish the story, and we tasted the wine, and it was like, wow, this is a special wine. And I think just to harken back a little bit to the conversation we had earlier, just about like Brunello and more expensive things. This is the wine also that punches well above its weight class for me. This is something that is a very, very well made expression of the Sangiovese grape. This is something that for someone who is a Sangiovese lover, this is like about as good as it gets. It's again, like the Jeff was saying, it's a whole bunch of Massal selection Sangiovese clones. So you kind of get this this spectrum of what the grape can do. These different clones, they ripen at different times. These are they express differently. Some give more of the kind of the bright red fruits. Then some give more of this kind of earthy sort of floral spice to it. It's definitely a very unique and kind of unique expression, and kind of a crash course in what the grape can do, especially where it's drinking right now at this 2013 vintage. I think it's beautifully aged. And again, I'm not someone who loves super old wines. Like some people think the older the better. Like I'm definitely not. I'm my sweet spot is typically for an aged wine experience is something like in the 7 to 15 year range, if I'm looking for something that has age on it. And this was exactly kind of perfect in my sweet spot there for you start seeing what those secondary, tertiary flavors can be, and you get some of that complexity that is just so alluring. And I just really felt myself going back to the glass like over and over and over again. like
I mean,
Jeff is
this
doing
is the
right now.
classic meditation wine, as they say in Italian.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
an incredible wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's taste
Yeah.
it a little bit. I mean, it's got the color is really interesting right off the bat. I mean, it's basically a uniform kind of bricked out
Mhm.
color, which might lead you to think it's kind of over the hill, but it's not at all. And then yeah, T and I were tasting it a little bit before and kind of watched it evolve a little bit after we opened it as well. Definitely a wine you want to open up, half an hour, I would say half an hour before and kind of watch it change. Really a lot of like kind of forest floor, mushroom, there's a little bit of that kind of cola flavor
Cola,
you
mhm.
expect from Nebbiolo more, but than Sangiovese, but got that. A lot of the fruit that's left in there is like really a lot of like I would say leans more red fruit.
Mhm.
When you say kind of like strawberry,
Mhm.
raspberry. I got a little bit of licorice in this too.
Mhm.
Um,
What's amazing to me is that there's still a lot of acidity in this
Mm.
wine. This wine can still go further. This is
oh
not,
yeah,
you can set this down for another 6-7 years easily,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And usually when people make Sangiovese for aging, you think of like Brunello de Montalcino, and those wines are very burly. This wine, it's delicate,
Mhm.
It's elegant. Yeah.
elegance.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a great descriptor of it. It's
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah. It was, I think I loved a lot of the kind of like, I had like cow nib and I had like a little bit of like kind of like worn leather and kind of like tobacco-y kind of vibe to it.
Tobacco and
Like
little
like in a
pepper.
good way, right? Like
Yeah.
like the fancy stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
like not the cheap stuff. But yeah, I think what I really love about this wine in particular is that it's made by someone who absolutely loves Sangiovese. Like like the guy Fabio Ceni, he's like a Sangiovese nerd. It's his passion. He loves it, and it's not something that you get that often. Is someone who's like really a diehard, devotee to the grape itself, to that variety. I mean, you get winemakers in let's say in Chablis they're like, yeah, we like Chardonnay, but we love Chablis more. They like the wines that Chardonnay makes, but they're or someone in I don't know, let's say in Piemonte who they love making Barolo or Barbaresco, but as far as like Nebbiolo is what they work with, and yes, they love it, but maybe they're not as much of like a like an absolute kind of like passionate sort of enthusiast necessarily about the grape itself. And I think in this case, you really have someone who has studied the history of the grape. You have someone who studied all these different variations of it, studied the lineages of the grape. And so that's something that I think you get an expression of someone who truly deeply knows what the variety can do.
Amazing too. It's like he doesn't have a big name appellation behind him. It just says Sangiovese Toscano.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
it.
That's like a not a prestigious appellation. I mean that is that is about as basic as it gets. Just before like Vino d'Italia or something like that. And so yeah, I think it's pretty impressive that he chose to go with that. I think it's kind of cool. Yeah. One thing, yeah, that you mentioned, Jeff, was just like the use of the large barrels. 2,000, 3,000 liter Slavonian. That's Hungarian for those of us who aren't all geography folks. Hungarian part of Hungary is the Slavonian oak forest there. Very commonly used in Italy. Usually you see a lot of those used, I would say, more so in Piemonte, because that was kind of the historical norm. You don't see them quite as often in Tuscany. It's definitely like an old school move, more classic move to use those large oak barrels in Tuscany, where you're in a region where nowadays it's very cool to use French barriques, to use like smaller French barrels, 200, 250, 55 liter, I think, French barriques that are giving a lot more of that kind of younger oak character to the wines. So this is something that I think also just again speaks to the kind of more classic and elegant nature of the wine.
So T was telling me that you guys sort of had to like resist doubling down on what they have, like a 2005 and a 2006.
Yeah, there were some deeper vintages where like, oh, Jeff and Dana are gonna get so mad at us if we just we just buy this whole vertical and have nothing to have no plan for it yet. But yeah,
But I mean, I'm very interested in trying those because I think this wine's amazing for.
yeah, I joke. I don't think you'd be too mad. I think it's more
Not too
about just
mad,
like now we got to figure out what to
Yeah,
do with it.
I
But
don't know how we're gonna sell it all, but yeah.
yeah. No, I think that is something we may revisit some of these kind of very intriguing, kind of compelling wines and come back with like a like an offer or something like that down the line where we could potentially get in like a even deeper aged selection of wines like this, and just kind of field it out there, see what folks think, because it's definitely something we'd love to to continue to explore wines like this that are a little bit more a little bit more maybe kind of pronounced in their I don't know, in their style and in their place, if you will.
Yeah, and wine you can't get at a $25 retail
Sure, yeah.
price point, for the club. It's super awesome to be able to offer them and have people actually be interested in snatching them up too. So
Well, I think at this point we can probably open it up here to any other remaining questions, thoughts, comments, tasting notes from anybody who's tasting along with us. And if there's anything there that's again we haven't answered during the discussion. If not, well, as always, we like to say thank you for being a club member. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for supporting us in what we do. It's really meaningful for us, and we love having all of you on.